Hello, everyone. This is Marcia Sinitar. Thank you so much for joining us on another archived presentation. This one is very old, and you can hear it from the young voice that you're going to hear, mine. And I want to make a few little updates because this was a seminar that I presented about my first book, Ordinary People as Monks and Mystics, a Paulist publication, still available online and still in print after all these years, decades. And for me, after all these years, it still holds up. I'm talking here to a group of spiritual directors, pastors, the helping professional group, which is my main constituency, especially since I've left the corporate sector many years ago again. And I usually will make a disclaimer at the beginning of any seminar on spiritual emergence, which is this topic. The caution to have people make sure that they're working with a qualified helping professional, because this is a thorny path, a difficult path, complicated, sometimes confusing, and sometimes we go against the grain of what we have been taught to do, conforming and so on. So here I didn't mention that because of the nature of the group that I was talking to. These are the people who are guiding us in our development and our unfolding of our true self, true nature, that genuine heart hunger that we have. But I'm mentioning it now. Another thing that I would mention now is that some of my vocabulary I would have to change. For example, and I'm not sure if I'll have time on the introduction, but you'll get the gist of it. I don't know that I would concentrate so much on our human development. I think I would mention more the spiritual unfolding, which is really, as I say, the heart and soul of who we are at the core of the what someone has called the hunger of our soul. For example, today I would not use that phrase, becoming more fully human. I think I would rather use from the book of Hebrews the idea that we are, yes, human, yes, fully human, ideally, but also the holy brethren of Christ Jesus himself. We hear that word or we read that word in the 3rd chapter, partakers of the heavenly calling. And later on we read that we are holy brethren of Christ Jesus. All right, so there's this idea. It's not implied, it's said actually, human and divine in Christ. Okay, you may not come from that place, but I do. I love that book of Hebrews. Another word I would not use except with an explanation, and that's the word vibration. Okay, this implies a kind of physical as opposed to spiritual state. But we read now in more recent research that prayer and meditation of all kinds, where there's a repetition, as in the rosary, of certain phrases that have a vibrational implication for our physical body, that this opens maybe a kind of pathway to an easy transcendence, what we read in Maslow, the peak experience. So I think I would go easy on that word vibration. And this goes for spiritual emergence or unfolding or development at any age. So I think along the way, as always, you're going to hear me mention children. Another thing that I have to tell you is that for me, listening to this after years and years of not hearing it, I realize now this is just about my realization. I don't know about anybody else, but I realized how much truth there is in this, universal truth, after all this time. And personally, I have to say that it strikes me that what I've been developing and writing about all of these years has been a personal journey, universal at the core, I believe, but I was writing about something that I eventually have lived into, if you understand the life that I have today.
So then the purpose tonight is to talk about this idea of adult spiritual emergence. And I want to acknowledge the fact that much of the remarks that I'm going to say are already in the book Ordinary People as Monks and Mystics, which is, a Paulus Press publication. And I've been doing research since 80s, the early 80s, on adults of all ages and all types, men and women, from about 18 through their 80s, who have been called. And I'd like to talk about that summons tonight. And then in the next session, this is a 2-part series, and then in the next session, talk a little bit about our individual response. Our response to this summons is always unique and sometimes radical and sometimes not. And the thing that we human beings have a tendency to do is to want to make a rule about everything. But for this spiritual emergence, my sense is that we can look for patterns, but it's important not to be Pharisees, pharisaical about it, and have a legalistic attitude. First we go through this stage, and then this stage, and then this stage, because even as we look at young children who are spiritually inclined, and I'll talk specifically about what I mean by spirituality in just a bit, what we see in those children is that they tend to be their own. It's as if they have a loyalty to some inner core, some inner authenticity. And the interesting thing about adults who are emerging spiritually is that very often they have some backing up to do. It's like, when you're swimming and you try to tread water, sometimes you have to move your feet backwards. And the backward movement is part of the summons. So for this session, I wanted to discuss that radical inner call to be more of who we are, and that really is what the summons is. I thought before discussing this in detail, I'd like to give some examples and kind of bring it into the concrete. Everything I'm going to say in these 2 series is designed to talk about the practical aspects so that you can assess yourself, take a reading and say, where am I on this path? And one of the things about emerging spiritually as adults is that we don't stop when we begin. It is an ongoing unfolding. And sometimes I think the tendency is to think, I've done that repair, or I've done this bit of forward movement, and so now I'm done. My sense is that the deeper you go within, the more authentically we respond, the more we want to. So this is a great desire, this yearning. But yearning for what? That's the question. What is it that I feel that makes me let go of the things that other people perhaps have felt were important? First example I wanted to talk about in this longing is the film, The Education of Rita. Maybe some of you remember seeing that movie. Really profound in many ways. And although Education of Rita is about a young woman who feels an urge to learn more and to leave the narrow confines of her marriage, not so much to leave her husband, but rather she wants to learn about good literature and good poetry She wants to be able to pronounce words properly. She wants her professor, whom she goes to for tutoring, to hold her to a tough standard. She doesn't want him feeling sorry for her. And I think in many ways, for example, when she reads Macbeth for the first time, she comes flying into his classroom. The tutorials that she has are one-on-ones. And she comes into his classroom and he's there with 30 or 40 people having a regular formal class, and he thinks there's something wrong. And she calls him out into the hall, and what he hears her say is how exciting Macbeth is. She's just electrified. She's thrilled with Shakespeare. This is the first time she's ever heard Shakespeare. And in the same way, I think we're electrified. We're turned on to the sense that something in us, something different is happening, and we want to refine this knowledge. So I think the first part about the summons is that it's a hunger. William Law calls it the hunger of the soul. And he says that the hunger of the soul is all that's needed, because everything else happens from that. And I think that as we assess ourselves, as we start to ask ourselves questions, about where am I on this path, where am I on this journey, whatever age and whatever our situation, I think it's important to ask where the desire is. How hungry are we? And sometimes, as we'll see as I move through this material, and I know talking to you as a group, sometimes maybe there are some duller periods. We go through phases where we're not moving as quickly as we might like to. This too, I think, is part of the summons. Some other examples of this audible, it's not really a voice, but it is a friend of mine calls it an inaudible hum, sort of a vibration almost to move on and join in with the stream of life. A couple that read The Ordinary People as Monks and Mystics wrote to me and said something like this, I'm paraphrasing. The woman wrote to me and she says, my husband's job expanded and he took a position with a bigger company. We moved from a small town where we'd been big fish in a little pond, and that same year we felt a need to cut back on social activities. And by the way, this is one of the patterns that I notice in people that I talk with, and certainly in myself, is this starting to get very sensitive about how we use time. So she says, we moved to a big city, but we felt a need to cut back on our social activities, and we began to incorporate a spiritual study into our personal lives. Within 2 years, we were yearning to simplify our lives. This meant selling our home again. My husband chose to quit his lucrative job. We opted to give away all our possessions, except our car and some necessities, and live as much as possible in the present. Fortunately, our youngest child had left for college, and we were free to pursue this next chapter of our life. I want to add that we were not dropping out. We were simplifying in order to deepen our experience of what it means to be human. And I think if we look at the film, Education of Rita, and try and draw some parallels between that which was decidedly in the nature of the film, although I think the director must have had, and the writer must have had some sense of the spirituality of this woman's desire to be more of a human being. I think every time we have the impulse to be more of who we really are, more empathic, more feeling, more caring, any of these values that are universally esteemed, we can be sure that spirituality is at play. Another friend of mine noticed herself working less intensely. She had been working very, very hard for many years and found the need to cut back on work in order to spend more time in natural surroundings and order her life. And for her, this was the yearning to become more fully human. But I hear from people who say that they've been laying dormant for years and years, and what they need is to work more. So I think if we look too superficially, what we see only are the behaviors. I think we have to look deep at ourselves to say, as I make this or that choice, what is this saying about any impulse, any stirring at all to unfold more of what we know we have at the deepest level within us, deepest heart. And it's very difficult to language or verbalize this with other people. And this again is one of the things that in the sphere of response, more than the summons perhaps, people will mention that it can be lonely. I think it's a purifying loneliness. I think for myself at least, it's always been difficult to talk about such an intimate dialogue. Buber says I and thou. Well, who is this I and who is this thou? But I've also found that because it's difficult, it's as if God is calling me for his own. It's supposed to be difficult. It's not supposed to be a public conversation. It's not supposed to be easy to discuss, and that's part of the joy of it. That's part of the intimate walk, that we go into our closet, that kind of thing. Another, and this is the last example I'm going to give as far as this specific practical call, would be a neighbor of mine. Just these few examples I'm mentioning, just to show you how varied it can be. And all along here I'm talking about adults. But if we think of children, there are children who are moved and determined to be their own person. And sometimes we chastise children for this, especially as teachers and parents. We're very insensitive to the call or stirring for the child. And maybe some of us have been programmed or encouraged away from our own best side. And this is something I think that if we were called away from our own best side in childhood, we have to take a look at how we treat the children that we are living with. But going back to this neighbor of mine, he said that he saw in 1970, a copy of the Whole Earth Catalog. And he said it presented me with a whole new realm of possibilities. I saw a picture of this little orb riding in its finite little path. That image influenced me to pull away from the way in which others around me were living, and I felt I wanted to take care of this fragile little planet. This made sense to me. From then on, I had the need to figure out a life for myself that was consistent with that goal in every single detail. Now, I mention this because we don't often think of people who are involved in the environmental movement, or who work with children, or who work with animals, or who are tending, maybe they are tending to something very natural. Could be building a house, or it could be laying bricks, or these very simple but elementary, primitive and primal activities, I think are not only healing, but they're signs that our spirituality is really at play. By the same token, I've written before and feel very strongly that art of all kinds, sculpting and painting and dance, all of these, I think we're beginning to understand, are yearnings. The scripture calls it groanings of the spirit. Isadora Duncan said, if I could say it, I wouldn't have to dance it. It's that these expressions allow us to have that intimate dialogue in a way that words cannot do. Human words cannot do. Sometimes when I'm writing, I'm very concentrated on what I'm doing, and all of a sudden as I'm working, it's as if I become aware that there's a song going on, and it's somewhere in the heart, area of the heart, or somewhere between the heart and the throat. Maybe these are the chakras, But if I get very still, even as I work, it's not only that one feels a certain vibration, but that one is that. In other words, we are the song. And I think dance and art and movement and sitting, breathing, Zen sitting, and prayer allows us to appreciate the fact that something so splendid is taking place. And the frustration that I have even in having this little discussion and hearing myself talk is that the words are at such a gross level and the song is so luminous. I think this is where the summons is, it heats up when we can be in touch with that stirring within us. So I ask myself frequently as I go through the day, just a little reminder, I try to get myself to listen carefully, listening inward, I think I may have called it, and I've heard other people refer to it that way. So I would just suggest that as we go through the day, as we are even sitting with friends, even some difficult situation, is to try to find our way back to that song. I find that one of the simplest ways is paying attention to breathing. And of course we are the breath, and the breath breathes thus. This too is a melody, a life melody. So with this call, with this summons, my sense and research and interviews shows two key values start to be evidenced in our life. It's not just that these are abstractions. These are not just ideas or theoretical. This you can actually see in a person's behavior. Excuse me. The first one is social transcendence. This is such a heavy phrase, but really it just simply means becoming awakened to the difference between who we are in our social conventional self and who we are in the most intimate core, that inner man or inner person of the heart. It's a perceptual shift. When I wrote Ordinary People as Monks and Mystics, I received letters from many people who were urban dwellers living in high-rises and corporate executives who felt very sensitive about the fact that I had only or predominantly quoted people who had moved to the rural communities and who were living simplified lives and so on. Even though I had said at the very outset, this is to show a dramatic pull away, a dramatic social transcendence. And I want to make it clear that this transcendence is in perception more than anything else. It's sort of an awakening. You could say it may be the conscious ascent to the inner voice. It's like that inner hum I was talking about. We start to hear it, and it's not only that we hear it, we start to feel that maybe it's leading us, or this is us. And the outer self, the false self, or the conventional self may be necessary, but not necessarily appealing, not necessarily healthiest, not necessarily the most loving. And so little by little, as we become socially transcendent, we start to make some natural adjustments in our life. For example, the person that I said saw the copy of the Whole Earth Catalog, or Rita, or my friend who was working more, or the other one working less. These little shifts in life are really the result of a value of social transcendence, where we become objective to convention and realize that convention is not for us as much as it may have been at one time. So it's not that it's wrong, it's that maybe there's a graduation taking place. That's again why I like that film so much, because in the education you see Rita going through these natural developmental stages. And I think all of us go through these natural stages, and my feeling is that it's not over when we think it's over. It's not over till it's over, and I don't know that it's ever over. The other value, the key, is self-transcendence. And this self-transcendence is another tricky phrase which is so simple to appreciate. If we think about when we were children and spontaneously maybe whirling around and around. You remember when you were a child, maybe you ever roll down a hill and then you'd get to the bottom and you'd look up at the sky and you'd be a little bit dizzy and the sky would be moving around so blue and the clouds moving. Or perhaps you were standing up and you put your arms out and you'd twirl around and then you'd look up at the sky, and again there was that sort of spontaneous unself-consciousness. Okay, so that is really what self-transcendence is. Maslow called it a peak experience, and we know that the saints of all faiths, the mystics especially, have talked about the ecstatic moment. Music does this, love does this. When we're fully focused on other than self, we are transported in this way. My sense is that people who answer the private summons, such a personal summons, begin more and more to live in that unself-conscious way. And I think that sometimes it's sort of a two-prong, good news, bad news. The good news is that we begin more and more to live so that we are not so much attending narcissistically to our own small egocentric self. The bad news is that because there's such charm in the experience, there may be a too self-conscious attempt to court the experience, to get it again. Oh, I liked that peak experience. What can I do to get it back? And I saw a piece of graffiti on a wall recently. It wasn't that recent. It was quite a while ago, actually. And it said, "Do not clutch at the gossamer web." So the beauty and the profundity of that piece of graffiti is that this unself-consciousness is so delicate that if we do forget it, if we don't run after it too hard, the sense that I have is that we begin more and more to live in the moment and have more of that spontaneous, pure awareness. And the more we dramatize it and run after it and study this and that specific way and watch ourselves carefully, is it here yet? It's like a kid in a car going to a amusement park and keeps asking their parents, "Are we there yet?" I think we have to be very careful with this because it is a gossamer web. It's the most beautiful gossamer web.